Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on this brisk spring morning for another in our series of events where we're bringing leading elected officials and thought leaders to Chicago. I hope you all had a chance to grab some coffee and something to eat because you're in for a real treat. I won't go too much into a formal introduction because Elaine here will do that for our speaker today, but we've been wanting to bring Congressman Gutierrez to the Institute since we opened just about 2.5 years ago, as he not only is an important leader here in Illinois, as so many people know, but arguably the most important leader on the national stage on behalf of immigration reform and one of the most important Latino leaders in the country. So it's a great honor to have him here with us for today's conversation that David will moderate. I wanted to mention that, as we always do, we will turn to questions from the audience. When we do, we ask that you keep your questions short and to the point, that it is a question. We'll also give priority to students first before we open the floor to everyone else for that. You can find out more about all of our upcoming events in our speaker series on our website. For those of you who don't know, that URL is politics.uchicago.edu. We have award-winning documentary filmmaker Davis Guggenheim tomorrow night on campus. He is the filmmaker behind An Inconvenient Truth and Waiting for Superman. He's working on a forthcoming film on Malala. He'll be talking about all of that with Allison Cuddy, formerly of WBEZ, so that should be a great conversation. We also have fellow seminars today at noon and at 4:30 this week, so a lot going on at the IOP. We invite all of you to be there. Let me now stop and introduce Elaine Yao, who is a second year at the college, who's majoring in economics and in public policy. She's from Farmington, Connecticut, and has been a key leader in our student civic engagement project focused on immigration and the citizenship pipeline. New Americans Use Chicago is the name of that group. Please join me in welcoming Elaine to the podium. Elaine?
Oh, goodness. I think that's all right. I think I'm good now. Or Thank you very much. Well, good morning, and thank you for joining us to hear from Representative Luis Gutiérrez today. So, as someone who's become drawn into Chicago's energetic debate over immigration reform, I've heard Representative Gutierrez's name mentioned again and again as a tireless champion for issues that affect Chicago's and the national immigrant and Latino community. So he was born and raised in Lincoln Park and later in Puerto Rico, and has been a thoughtful and passionate advocate for immigration reform, expanding worker rights, gun violence prevention, and several other progressive causes. Before serving in Congress, Representative Gutierrez worked as a cab driver and social worker, and later served as an advisor to Mayor Harold Washington and then a Chicago city alderman. Since his election to U.S. Congress in 1992, he has been instrumental in pushing for congressional action on immigration reform and immigrant rights. He played a key role in advocating for executive action by President Obama to provide deportation relief for long-term undocumented immigrants and their families, often known as DACA. We are honored to have him here today to share his experiences as a senior member of the House of Representatives in Washington, as well as from his work as an exceptional member of the Chicago community. Joining Congressman Gutierrez this morning is the IOP's director, David Axelrod. Please join me in giving them a warm welcome.
Elaine, thank you. Steve, after all these years, I thought you would know how to leave the microphone in good shape for the next speaker. It is really, really an honor to welcome an old friend, Luis Gutiérrez. We were just talking before we came out here about how we first met. Luis was a community activist in the 26th Ward on the northwest side of Chicago, near northwest side of Chicago. And he, I guess 32nd Ward at that time.
32nd at that time,
and
yeah.
He had the idea that he would challenge Dan Rostenkowski, one of the great old war horses of the Democratic Party, for ward committeeman. And I had an inkling of what an uphill battle this was when Congressman Gutierrez drove the cab he was driving up to our interview and parked it for the interview. But talk, before we get into the sort of issues of today, okay, talk a little bit about your beginnings in politics and how you got involved, because part of our mission here is to encourage young people to get into the arena, and you got into it in a kind of surprising way.
Well, we'll just fast forward. So I'm in Puerto Rico. I'm 15 years old, and my mom and dad obviously came to Chicago They came to New York in 52, Chicago in 53. So I was born here in December 53. And Lincoln Park wasn't Lincoln Park of today. Okay, don't think my parents were rich. It was a working class neighborhood, and I went to Catholic school, St. Michael's. And then when I was 15, my parents realized their dream, and they returned to Puerto Rico. And they returned to a little town, San Sebastián del Pepino. And I lived in a bilingual household. That means my parents only spoke Spanish, and I only spoke English. And we understood each other perfectly. No, we did, we understood. And then we got to Puerto Rico, and I still remember getting off the plane and feeling that tropical heat for the first time in my life. And I said, Dad, can you buy me a Coca-Cola? And I remember turning around, he looked at, and he said it in Spanish, which he always spoke to me in Spanish. He said, aquí se habla español. Estamos en Puerto Rico. You speak Spanish here, we're in Puerto Rico. And I felt, you didn't get smart ass with your parents back in 1969, right? Because today they would say something, kids would. And I kind of looked at him, I said, for 15 years, this has been okay. You knew we were coming here, You could have let me in on the game plan. But David, our parents, I'm not criticizing, that's, it's who they were, right? I mean, my dad had a 9th grade education. He worked really hard, and he realized his dream, and he wasn't too much into, come on, son, tell you this new experience. I tell you that because that's politics for me. So politics for me was, in Chicago, I was Puerto Rican. I lived in a Puerto Rican neighborhood. I was defined by my ethnicity and where my parents came from, because that's Chicago. We may have been in the North, but it was, remember, I was born when it was still separate but equal in the United States of America, and Chicago was a reflection of that. And so when I got to Puerto Rico and they started calling me gringo and americano, I was really confused. I said, you should go, no, yo era blanquito. I said, white? I said, the only day I was white was the day I was born, and the guy made the mistake, because they did put white on my birth certificate, right? And so I share that with you to say, so I affirmed who I was. What better way than affirming who you are? Joining the Puerto Rican Independence Party. Because the statehooders rejected me. The Commonwealthers thought I was...
Yeah, we should just give a little bit of background. Most people here probably know, but the status of Puerto Rico was and continues to be an ongoing debate, and it divides into three categories.
Statehooders, right.
Yeah,
those who want it to be a state,
them, yeah.
Those who want Puerto Rico to be a state, those who want maintain the status quo, and those who want it to be a free and independent nation. And so I was 16 years old. The folks who accepted me were interestingly enough, were the independentistas, because they saw me as someone that was part of the diaspora, that had returned home, right, to Puerto Rico. So yes, I spoke English, but they understood me from some historical, sociological context as somebody who was returning. That my parents had to leave was colonialism. That they were returning was a good thing. So they were the most accepting, and at the same time, I had the Young Lords back in Chicago. I had a little button, Tengo Puerto Rico en mi corazón, right? I have Puerto Rico in my heart, from the Young Lords, right? Which was our version of the Black Panthers, right? And so growing up in Lincoln Park, I had those affirmations. Anyways, long story short, I moved forward. I really don't get involved in politics much after my Puerto Rican Independence Party in Puerto Rico. I was sharing earlier, but then in 1983, Harold Washington ran for mayor. I worked here at 950 East 61st Street. I was a social worker with the Department of Children and Family Services. So I came here for 5 years. Every other social worker, except for Dennis Bonebreak, was black, okay? And I remember in November, some of them had Jane Byrne pins, some of the black social workers had Richie Daley. By February, I knew Harold was going to win, because every black social worker had a Harold Washington. And I would go and I said, what happened? I never had a Jane Byrne, but they would deny it. And I was like, okay. So I get involved, and I'm just a poll watcher, because that's the level of excitement. I'm like, okay, I'll be a poll watcher, because I'm not too much into election, and politicians are corrupt, and they're really not going to make a difference. And then he wins the primary. And I'm happy. I said, my basic thing was, it'd be good. We're going to give the black guy a chance to run the city of Chicago. I didn't think the other people had done such a spectacular job. Let's give him. Plus, at the debates, he just seemed to me to be so astonishingly superior to everybody, intellectually, right? And I said to him, he's smart and it's good. And then they knocked on my door, the precinct captains. Now these precinct captains, I liked them. I did. I liked them. They got my tree trimmed. They gave me 2 beautiful garbage cans. No, and anything I ever needed. Because in Chicago, even though you pay property
And all they
taxes.
asked for it in return was your vote.
And they didn't care. When they came, they said, who are you voting? I said, we're voting for Harold Washington. He said, that's okay. Can you give Gabinski the vote? Because we want to make
the
sure
alderman, yes.
Can you give the alderman Gabinski the vote? And I said, sure. So even when I showed up to vote for Harold Washington, they were like, that's a loser, right? Because they were with Rich Daley, and they didn't want you to vote for Jane Byrne. Anyway, fast forward. Here I am. They come to my house. These are the same captains that I've seen time and time again. And they bring an Epton poster.
Bernie Epton was the Republican candidate running against Harold Washington.
Before it's too late.
That was his slogan, Epton now, before it's too late.
Yeah, it wasn't for better education, for safer streets, but before it's too late. And come on, you guys, everybody gets the drift, right? It's Chicago. And I chased them down the block. I just yelled at, and I said, don't listen to them, man. They're racist, and they're bigoted, because it just was clear to me. And I said, well, there goes my tree trimming and my garbage cans of the future. But I went down and I met Slim Coleman. I didn't know Slim Coleman. I went down,
Activist who worked for Harold
An activist
Washington.
who worked for Harold.
I'll translate all of this for you.
You'll translate.
I'm enjoying this. I don't know.
And I go to the Fullerton and Western office, and they teach me what a plus. They like Harold.
Yeah.
A 0 plus, a 0,
Yeah,
a
right.
minus. They're not gonna, and they teach me and they give me a poll sheet, and I called every one of my friends. And so I called Maria, and I said, Maria, never talk to me about apartheid again if you don't join me in this campaign. What do you mean? I said, no, you can't talk, because here we have. So I went to friends, and my feminist friends, I told them, my independentista friends, every one of my friends, I challenged them ideologically. I mean, I knew what their belief, because they're your friends, so you know what they believe in.
Did you have any like bowling friends, or were they all
I
like
didn't have
activists?
any of those. I had all these activist friends from the Northwest Community Organization, and they were all trained. They were pretty well trained in Salalinsky, and so they were trained, but we hadn't been doing much. Anyways, long story short, I knocked on everybody's door in my precinct, and we made a plan. We went to all the Puerto Ricans, and we said, one day a Puerto Rican will run, and they will use the same excuse of racism against. That's what we told Puerto. And Puerto Ricans got it. They were my easiest demographic group, right? Then on Wilmot, there were about 50-something African-American registered voters, almost none of which had voted, because Rostenkowski's captains did nothing to get them to vote. So, I mean, I still remember that lady, I can't remember her name, but she was an older black woman. On election day, the precinct captains from Rostenkowski tried to get her. And she said, no, I'm waiting for Louis. Louis gonna come and pick me up. Because I told her, don't let anybody take you to the polling place but me. I mean, but that's belief but my story is not unique. Anybody who studies that campaign knows that there were thousands of other people just like me who had virtually no experience, but really hated the bigotry and the prejudice that was that campaign. And so we got activated, and we learned a little bit, and then the next year I ran against Rostenkowski, and I got a whopping 24.8. Please remember, I remember every percentage, 24.8% of the vote. I was really happy that day, because Rostenkowski made a point of having every one of my neighbors have his poster in there, and not exaggerate, no. All down 2100 West on Homer, every one of my neighbors had a Rostenkowski poster. So was I happy on election day? Yes, because they would all take those Rostenkowski posters off. And so that's how I get involved in politics.
Yeah,
Took a little
and
bit.
then 2 years later, you were elected to the city council.
Well, then 2 years later, Harold Washington.
I can attest that even when he was parking his cab and talking to me about running, he was brimming with the same enthusiasm.
Yeah. So Harold Washington was a great mayor for a lot of reasons. So it was a lawsuit. And so African-American Latinos sued the city of Chicago, saying the way you design these aldermanic districts is unfair to Latinos. And we used the Voting Rights Act, which Harold Washington had amended when he was a congressman, the Voting Rights Act. So you didn't have to prove that they intentionally did it, that they kind of connived and conspired. All you had to prove was the result. So if the result was that you diluted the voting power, you win in court. And Harold, I still remember they said, Mayor, they're going to court. City of Chicago just got sued, and you guys are getting sued. The City of Chicago, you're the mayor, and you guys are defendants in this Voting Rights Act case. And he says, what are the lawyers of the city going to say? Guilty as charged, he said. Guilty as charged. We're going to plead guilty and beg for the mercy of the court. Can you imagine a mayor doing that today? I can't.
Yeah.
But he could do that. And obviously I ran.
And they created two.
They created four.
Four.
So you had Miguel del Santiago, who was the Nesda, Keene, alderman, part of the Verdoliak 29. And then you had Jesus Garcia, which everybody knows who he is. Jesus Garcia and we won. So Juan Solis went with the Verdoliak. He's from the 25th Ward.
So two went to the organization.
And that was exactly enough for Harold to have 25 votes in the city council. Take over
control of the city council.
And we took over control of the city council, so we got rid of Ed Kelly at the Park District. We took over the CTA. We took over the Board of Education. A huge bond deal that we got through. And Harold beat Jane Byrne 65-35 in '87. Which demonstrates, right? Among Latino voters in my ward, which I bring that up to tell you that you could see the change. In other words, and you got to remember, Harold, I don't know what the voter turnout was among African Americans, but it was huge. And he was getting 95% plus of the black vote. Now, conversely, the white candidate was doing the same among white population. But there was one population that changed, right? And it was Latinos. So in '80, we changed. We went and we stayed with Harold Washington, and he increased even in the primary, and in the general election against the Republican, he did even better. So it was real coalition building, because I still remember, maybe you remember this, David, he had a debate with Verdoliak and Hines and the Republican.
Don Hyder,
yeah, and Hyder. And there was a debate, it was on TTW, and I went to see him the next morning. And I had one of my precinct captains got this girl pregnant, and he really needed a job really, really bad because he was going to be a father. So I kind of I was going to go explain this to the mayor, that I really needed, see if we could find a spot for this kid. And he stopped me. He said, Luis, I'm going to tend to you right away and what you need. But how do you think I did in the debate yesterday? And I said, shit, man, if I tell him the truth, the kid probably doesn't have the job. Because I didn't think he had done that well. And I said, well, I told him the truth. I said, it wasn't the take no prisoners Harold Washington. I think you let him get away with a lot yesterday, and you weren't feisty, and you weren't the Harold Washington we've come to know. So I don't think you did that good in the debate. And a big smile came on his face. And he said, great. And I said, well, how's that great? He said, I had 18% of the white vote going into the debate, and I wasn't going to scare one of them away. And that was Harold Washington, right? In other words, he had a plan for not being the same Harold Washington. And in the end, he won. After how brilliant he was, it was amazing that he still got under 52% of the vote to get reelected.
Yeah. We could go on for quite a while on this subject, but which is a great subject, worth exploring. But I know that I want to move it forward a little, but to do that, you supported Rich Daley in '89, and then a congressional district was created that linked the Hispanic communities of Chicago, the Puerto Rican communities on the north side, largely Mexican American communities on the south side. It wasn't a seamless merger, was it? I mean, I know when I was doing advertising, political advertising, I always used a Colombian voiceover because
neutral.
If you used neutral voiceover because you didn't want to antagonize either community. How was it making that adjustment as a Puerto Rican? How much of your district was Mexican American at that time?
Well, I lived on the north side, so Humboldt Park was Puerto Rican neighborhood, and Pilsen Little Village, back of the yard, Mexican neighborhood. And this is a long time ago. It really was a lot. I mean, it's 90. We're talking about 92. So it's quite a long time ago politically in the city of Chicago. And I mean, there were fights on the north side in Humboldt Park. Puerto Ricans like baseball, Mexicans love soccer. It's just, you know, I mean, there are some things that are just true, right? I mean, that doesn't mean there aren't Mexicans that like or Puerto Ricans that like soccer. It's just in general. And so as Mexicans began moving in the neighborhood, there was a struggle because they wanted to convert the baseball lots, and Puerto Ricans were like, no, these are baseball, we were here first. You get the kind of, and the conflict that existed there. So when I ran in '92, the district was 65% Hispanic. And Juan Solis, the same Juan Solis that was with the Verdoli Act 29, he was going to make a comeback running for Congress. He had just lost his aldermanic seat. And he was going to be the great Mexican-American.
He was Mexican, yeah.
He was Mexican. He was going to be the great Mexican-American champion. And as the campaign went on, I was really, really lucky because I hired the strategy group. And there were just great people there. I could name them, but I want just great group of people there. David Wilhelm, and he went on to run the campaign for Clinton and Little Rock. And I got a great group of people. And one of the things is it's good to bring professionals into your campaign because I don't think Juan Solis didn't. He kept his barrio-oriented, compinches there and put them together. Anyways, long story short, on election day, Juan Solis wouldn't concede because it was like 171 for him to 3 for me in a precinct. So Juan Solis said, the problem was on the north side, in the Puerto Rican neighborhood, it was 173 and 2 for him. So it was, no, if you go back and want to be a student of ethnic politics and the way it works, look at 1992 primary election, Juan Solis, Luis Gutiérrez, and you're going to see, I mean, I get crushed in Little Village and Pilsen, but he does too. Why'd I win with 65% of the vote? Bridgeport. I get 70% of the vote in Bridgeport. Lekowitz in the 30th Ward. Yes, my friend Juan Solis, he made a fundamental mistake. He concluded that 65% population meant that 65% was going to be 65% of the voters. It wasn't. The people who were determining who the first Hispanic member of Congress from the Midwest were going to be were not Hispanics. We were about 40% of those that came out to vote. It was non-Hispanics. And my campaign, we did a really good job. So when we were on a debate on TTW, and he would say, you're just with Mayor Daley, and he's gonna be, and I go, I have an excellent relationship with the mayor. I mean, come on. I mean, it's Bridgeport, right? That's where Mayor Daley lived at that time. He lived in Bridgeport. Yeah. And I would go, I understand that his mother is voting for me. I'd say these things. And he's voting for me, and his lovely wife is voting. Yes, the Daleys are all voting for Luis Gutiérrez. My way of saying, okay, all you nice white people in Chicago, right? I'm good. But that's the kind of campaign. Now, move forward. Best precincts for Luis Gutiérrez, Little Village, right? You can go back to the last, there was 102 to 3.
Why?
Immigration and what we...
Even back then?
No.
Yeah, this is where I was going, which is you seized the immigration issue early, yes. And as Steve mentioned, you're the premier spokesman on that issue. In fact, when you said your father forced you to learn Spanish, I'm just thinking, boy, the folks on Univision must be really grateful for that because you fill a lot of their time.
Right.
But was it a conscious decision on your part to take up an issue that was of huge importance to this constituency whose trust you had to earn?
Yes, it was, David. I got elected, I opened up my office, and almost everything people came to me to talk to me about was immigration related. It was just clear to me. Now, being Puerto Rican, I didn't have any, I didn't have an experience with immigration issues. Puerto Ricans have been citizens since 1917 of the United States, so I didn't have an issue. But it looked, so I looked at it and I said, you know what, this is what people need. And I looked how I had been crushed. I mean, it was like 95% for my opponent to 5% for me. and these are Latinos, right? And at the same time, and you know, Jesus was a state senator, and I had so many good friends. So we built a coalition, and I said, here were two goals: unite the Latino community, because I thought that before I could really build allegiances, right, alliances with other communities, the first thing I had to do was take care of home. And so I looked at my future leadership in the city of Chicago and nationally, and I said, I've got to heal this rift that exists. And so immigration was going to be a way. So Puerto Ricans, they were like astonished, and you could see the pushback I would get from, why are you always helping Mexicans become citizens, and why is it always about Mexico, and blah, 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 blah. And so David, from 94 through 2004, we helped approximately 50,000 people become citizens of the United States of America. So today, my congressional district, today Hispanics, Latinos determine who the congressman is going to be from the 4th Congressional District. And so that's a legacy that I leave that you cannot change. Why? Because we figured it out. It was going to be through citizenship, that we were going to expand the political base. And obviously, once I began to hear the stories, and I just want to, it was very easy for me. My mom and dad came here in 1952. They came to New York City. My mom was 18, my dad was 20. And this is, you can put Jewish in here, you can put so many, Italian,
Yeah.
you can
I'm the
put
son
it.
of an immigrant.
So you can put whatever, right? And they came to New York City, and about 1 million Puerto Ricans showed up in the United States during that decade. And let me tell you, there wasn't like a welcome mat. Oh, what a great idea, all these Puerto Ricans have decided to show up. It wasn't the way it was. In New York City, the news media was very mean and vicious, right? They're criminals. They just want to be on welfare. They're destroying New York City. Oh, and they're bringing tropical diseases. That's the America that my mom and dad confronted, and that's the America I grew up in. You know, it sounds so similar to the kind of charges that are placed against immigrants today. So it was very easy once I made that connection, but clearly, so today, David, thank you for helping me transition. So today, if you look, the very best precincts in the 4th Congressional District are actually in Little Village, right? The more Mexican part. I mean, I get 95% of the vote.
Let me ask you a question, because the implication of, you talk about registering 50,000 voters. I want to kind of plow into the opposition to immigration reform. There are, you know, one of the arguments is that people came here illegally and should be held accountable for that. Sure. Another motivation some have suggested is that all of these folks become citizens, they become voters as well and can change the dynamic. So what's your answer to the first thing, the first argument, and what's your sense of the second?
The first one is this, that whatever punishment, there should be a relationship between that punishment and what you did. In other words, if you don't put a quarter in the meter, you don't lose your car. If you're late on your mortgage, you don't lose your home. You know, just so that we understand, being in the United States undocumented and working here is a misdemeanor. I just want to clarify that. That's the way our law looks at it. These are misdemeanor charges against you being here. Number two, we're all complicit. Every last one of us. We don't give a hoot when we see that Hispanic-looking woman. We just want our bed made and a nice, decent place to sleep. Come on. You can go in Chicago, every restaurant. It could be a Greek restaurant, Indian restaurant. We could get in trouble, right? A Chinese restaurant. Come on. The cooks and the dishwashers. I like playing golf, right? And I can go to Wilmette and Winnetka and Oak Brook. Who's tending all of those?
The landscapers.
Thank you. And I know you're saying, oh, you're saying all Latinos are landscapers? Well, I got to tell you something. I have not seen a landscaper that's been Latino in quite a long time. okay? I'm sure there are non-Hispanic landscapers. All I'm trying to say is, I see who the dishwashers are, I see who the people who make the beds, and I will tell you something, 70% of the people that pick the fruit and the vegetables that you are so happy to go and purchase at your local grocery store, those were picked by foreign hands, undocumented in the United States. And I will tell you categorically here today, I did not raise, my daughter's getting her PhD at LSU and Baton Rouge, and I did not have her persevere so that she could go pick lettuce and tomatoes and work the fields. Now, I'm not trying to denigrate that work. I'm simply trying to say someone's got to do it. And in America, nobody's having children and raising them so that they can go and work the fields, okay? But yet somebody has to do it. And it's an essential, important part of our economy, our agriculture. So foreign hands are going to pick our food in foreign lands, or they're going to pick it here. You make a decision how you want your food and the safety of your food that's delivered to your table. I would rather have those foreign hands pick it here and be organized. Lastly, think about it a moment. If they're doing that kind of backbreaking work, I've seen people harvest garlic. I don't know if you've got to get on your knees and you've got to dig it out of the dirt. Hour in and hour out, right? It's tough work. And they work in the fields, and you should see the deplorable conditions that they still live in. And you know something? At the end of the day, we're Americans. We should respect them and the work and the sweat and the toil, especially when we know we don't raise our kids to do that work. So my thing is, look, we're all complicit. They didn't all just show up. And it isn't all about the border. And it really angers me and a lot of Latinos when they keep talking about the border, and they're still doing it in New Hampshire. Secure the border. You know which border they're talking about. They're talking about the one between Mexico and the United States. What about the border known as LAX? What about the border known as JFK? What about the border known as O'Hare, where over 5 million undocumented workers in the United States crossed and came to this country? How come we never talk about those borders and those immigrants that have come? Why is it always, and let me tell you, this is a rhetorical question because you all are smart enough to know the answer, right? We know why. So
they're smart enough to recognize a rhetorical question.
Right. I'm at the University of Chicago. So my point is, look, they're 5 million American citizen children have parents that are undocumented, right? People are here. You know why they're out of status? Because they're waiting to get their visas here. And then the Congress decided to pass a law that if an American citizen is waiting to get the visa for his wife in the United States, she has to pay a 10-year penalty later on. I mean, they've rigged the system so that you have people who are outside of the system. So that's the first. The second is, look, the Republican Party should do really well among Latinos. George Bush didn't do too bad in
44%.
44%. But you know, George Bush tried. And then he tried to pass immigration reform. And a lot of people say, oh, Latinos and immigration, why are you always, making it? When I first started making the argument, everybody says, oh, Latinos and that's not an issue that ties together. Now, nobody. I saw Cokie Roberts this past weekend on the Stephanopoulos that she said, well, they could be in New Hampshire, but all those Latinos are angry because of immigration and they've got to deal with it. They've got to deal with immigration. 1 million. And it is a political question for the Republican Party. Because, see, here's how I look at it, David. Let's say you don't let any of the 11 million ever become citizens, right? They're still going to have kids. And those kids are American citizens, 5 million of them. And I have a funny feeling I know how they're going to vote when they get to be 18. They're going to vote in the self-interest of their parents, number one. The other thing is 1 million Latinos, I'm not talking about other immigrants, 1 million Latinos turn 18 every year in America, and yes, they're all American citizens. And there's nothing the Republican Party can do. So what are you doing as a party? Just angering this constituency time and time again, which is growing, and that there's nothing that you can do about its growing emergence as a demographic group in the United States of America. So if you went and eliminated every Hispanic in America that was undocumented, there'd still be 48 million of us. And we're growing. And we'd continue to grow. And the million would still turn into citizens every year, right? So all I say is be practical about it. Take this issue off the table. And then I think you can discuss other issues.
But obviously the internal politics of the Republican Party is is quite different in the nominating process of the Republican Party. So let's just, I know because I want to get to the questions,
Sure.
let's just talk about the status of where we are on immigration reform. The president's issued his orders
Yes.
under his executive authority. Those are now being tested in the courts.
Yes.
What do you anticipate? There's a lot of speculation that the appellate court will uphold the challenge to the law and it will go to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
How do you expect that to wind up? And if the court were to throw out the order, then what?
Let's begin with this. It is a very popular executive order of the President of the United States. Last December, Mayor Rahm Emanuel and I held an event. 1,000 people showed up. And 1,000 people, we couldn't let them in to the activity. Now, when was the last time you saw a congressman call a meeting and 1,000 people showed up ready to shell out $485, go through a background check to get a work permit, and 1,000 stayed outside? It's a very popular program. So that's number one. Number two, what do I think? I think we've got some really bad luck. I mean, they shopped around for just the right judge, and they got the judge from California. That judge should have just said, you know what, I can't. I've already said all these mean, nasty things about the president and his actions in the past, and I've ruled against them in the past, and he should have just said, I'm not gonna take this case. But he didn't. He loved taking the case, and he ruled exactly the way the 26 Republican governors and attorney generals challenging the order. But a couple of things. So then we got two Tea Parties of the three, so of the Fifth Circuit, it's a very conservative, right. But of the three judges we got at random, we're really doing bad at this randomness. Two of them are real Tea Party guys, right? So right. What's the expectation?
Goes to the Supreme Court.
So it looks like, but let me just say this, just so that we can, what the president did was within the authority that he has as president of the United States. I'm gonna give you two examples. Emancipation Proclamation is nothing but an executive order of the President of the United States as Commander-in-Chief. That's how Abraham Lincoln issued the amendment. He didn't go to, I know a lot of people think there was no act of Congress. House and the Senate didn't get together, and there was a reconciliation, and we got the Emancipation Proclamation. No, he did it. And the second one is Truman, July 1948. What did Truman do? Through an executive action, right? He desegregated the armed forces of the United States. And that was July of 48. And I mean, if he had had a vote on it, the Democrats would have voted against it, especially the Southern senators. They would have quashed it. But he did it. But here's a couple of things. We had to pass the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, right? To do what? To make real the Emancipation Proclamation, we had to do the 14th Amendment, guaranteeing citizenship to all those former slaves. And we had to pass the Civil Rights Act in July of '64 in order to make the President Truman's executive order. And eventually, we will pass legislation affirming, right, the legalization of the same people. I mean, I just think history is on our side, and the American people and where they've been in terms of justice are on our side.
Let me ask one last question about that, then I can see you in my line of vision. I know what that means. When you talk about legalization, what if the proposition that can pass Congress is just about legalization and not about citizenship?
Sure.
What do you do then?
Okay, so this is where you get in trouble at the University of Chicago today, right? I could get in trouble. Here's what I would say. Number one, I will never negotiate to take citizenship off the table permanently. So if you say, if you accept this, you will never become a citizen. Now, if someone were to make me an offer greater than the offer of the executive action of the President of the United States, which covers about 5 million people, and gives you a 2-year work permit. So somebody say, hey, Luis, I have a way to get 8 million people, and I'll give them a 10-year work permit, but I'm not going to prescribe in the legislation a path to citizenship. Neither am I going to prescribe that they can't be. Here's what I'm going to bet on. I'm going to bet on stopping all those deportations and healing all of those families.
On the theory that in 10 years, no one's going to say.
On the theory of this, right? In America, do you really think they're never going to become citizens of the United States? I mean, in the America that we know, Yes, let's fight today. So I kind of have a more of a utilitarian approach. Let's do the greatest good for the greatest number of people today, right? As long as we do not abdicate, right, the ability of them becoming, because they should become full citizens of the United States of America for two reasons. It's the right thing to do, plus it gives our government, it gives our society as an American society glue, right? You want people to have a self-interest, and you want them to have something in the game. If they feel that they're not in the game, that they're not permanent, that this is something that can be taken away from them, you see what happens in Europe with these kinds of immigration policies. You have people that feel that they are outsiders. I don't want them to be outsiders. Plus, the dreamers, the youngsters that we have made, the president through his executive order, now 700,000 of them have work permits. These are immigrants who arrived in the United States before they were 16 years of age, but basically were raised in America and gone to school in America. Let me just share something. Look, they're Americans, but everything but a piece of paper. Just meet them if you meet them. They pledge allegiance to the same flag year in and year out. That my kids, they like the same music. They love America. They speak English. This is the only country they've ever known. For most part, immigrants are just like that. This is the country that they love. Don't you want somebody who loves this country and wants to adopt this country to be part of America? I think it's the strength. So I want them to be citizens because I think it strengthens us as a society.
You may have partially answered this question, but what about the amnesty charge that this essentially is forgiving what was done?
Sure.
And
well, as you know, the Senate bill says you have to go into a program for 10 years. You have to pay all your federal taxes, your state taxes, but you are ineligible for anything, including Obamacare. That's the Senate bill. So you receive no benefits. It's very strict for 10 years. If you one DUI, you're out of the program. I mean, it's a very strict program. Then at the end of the 10 years, if you paid your taxes, you've worked really hard, and of course you've never gotten a cent of government help, then you can apply, right, to graduate from that program. I don't think that's amnesty. You want to know what amnesty was? Ronald Reagan was amnesty. No, Ronald Reagan was amnesty. I mean, I think of the debate between Mondale and Ronald Reagan in 1984, and at some point I should have been cheering for Ronald Reagan, right? Because Ronald Reagan had a more progressive position on immigration than our candidate did on that particular issue. And now in the whole of the thing, I had to vote for Mondale. But on the issue of immigration, he was very progressive. And what did he say? He said, make them citizens of the United States. In 1986, when we passed the Immigration Reform and Control Act, you showed up in 1988, you proved you were here like 4 years in the United States. That was it. No test, no English. In the bill today, there's an English proficiency, there's a civics component to it, there's a lot of learning and a lot of things you have to do in order to gain the possibility, not the guarantee, the possibility of American citizenship. So they make American citizenship, so if you added 10 years, then you apply, that takes another year, that's 11. Then you have to be in the United States 5 years as a permanent resident. You're talking about 16 years down the road, right? Before they can become citizens of the United States. I don't think that that's amnesty. Amnesty, Ronald Reagan gave us amnesty. You showed up within within a year, you were a permanent resident of the United States. Within 5 years, when I get elected in 1993, you could apply for American citizenship.
So let's take some questions. Students have preference. Hamid.
Hi, my name is Jaime Sanchez. I have a quick comment. So my parents and my grandparents and great aunts and my great grandparents were all California farm workers. And even my mom in California thinks you're a congressman. So
thank you.
So thanks for your work.
Thank you.
There was a time in Chicago when she could probably vote here.
Probably. But my question is this. So I just wrote my senior thesis on the '83 election.
Okay.
And the research shows that this was a time of Latino disunity, right? Where 15% of Latinos voted for Harold Washington in the primary. And there was a lot of division even after his election. And a lot of the same problems are happening today. So I would just want to hear your take on the status of Latino unity today.
Sure. He's right. In the primary, Harold's, it was really bad. And Latinos, 85% of them either voted for Jane Byrne or Richie Daley in the primary. But my point is this. Black voters continue to vote for Harold Washington in the general election, and white voters went straight to Epton, okay? The one group of people where your research should show you changed in the general election were Latinos that went from 15 to 60%. That's a 400% increase. And it's the only demographic group that showed movement, right? And there's probably a lot of good reasons, including my work in the 2nd precinct of the 32nd Ward. They got some of that done.
Where weirdly he won by 10,000 votes.
Yeah. My point is, you saw that. And you know, Harold did a great job because he did it good on, he hired Maria Zelda, who was the first mayor of the city of Chicago that said immigration can't be coming on any campus of the city of Chicago. It was Harold Washington. Maria Zelda, who was Puerto Rican, was in charge of the mayor's office of employment and training, and immigration agents asked her for her papers. And she was part of Harold Washington's cabinet. So Harold said, no more immigration. I think Harold was ahead of his time on a lot of different levels. Then he supported me and Jesus Garcia. Look, we went against the machine. And I'm not going to tell you I was broke. I wasn't broke. And the reason I wasn't broke because Harold Washington had a fund, and that fund infused tens of thousands of dollars into my campaign. And they did the same thing for Jesus Garcia. Plus, it was a pretty powerful thing to have a mayor, right? Put his arm around you and walk up and down the streets with you. I mean, it gave you some gravity. They said, who's Luis? He's got the mayor. He's an important guy, right? So he gave us a lot of money. So right after 84, Jesus Garcia beat Stenberg for committeeman in 84. I lost to Rostenkowski in 84. Harold made Jesus Garcia deputy commissioner of the water department, and he gave me the job of general superintendent of the Bureau of Electricity. Don't worry, the water flowed and the electricity did too.
Luis supplied half the electricity himself.
That's good, David. My point is this. He gave us the opportunity to gain experience in City Hall. What other mayor was going to do something like that? You know, and so he hired many of us. So what happens in 86, Chuy and I win. And then the mayor, if you look at the 87 election results, you will see that Mayor Washington gets over 60% of the vote against a white candidate in the primary and does even better in the general election. So what I'm trying to say is there was a healing process. And look, one thing that Jesus Garcia did was he did galvanize the Latino community and the Latino vote. I mean, he got 70% plus of the Latino vote. And there were many more Latinos voting. But I'm going to tell you something. When 2/3 of the Latinos stayed at home, even this past election, we still have a lot of work to do, right? When 2 out of 3 Latinos still didn't vote, it speaks a lot, at least of those that are registered to vote.
Other questions? Yeah, Eric.
Thank you so much for coming. Kind of as 2016 is rolling out, I presume you're probably going to support the Democratic candidate, but there's probably at least a significant minority chance that person may not win. So if you're going to see one of these Republican contenders get out there, who do you think on the issue of immigration you would be able to work with best in trying to forge some sort of bipartisan consensus?
Well, we'd have to stay with the Bush family. I got to tell you, the first Bush, is the second actually, 2000 to 2008, he tried. He tried twice, 2006 and then 2007. I mean, I had Homeland Security Chertoff and Secretary Commerce Gutierrez visit with me at least a dozen times during that 18-month period in order to cobble together a coalition. But I think whoever it is going to have a difficult time. Look, here's what I can tell you, and that is there are many good, strong voices in the Republican Party that are for immigration reform. You all remember that Paul Ryan came to Chicago with me, and he stood with me at the podium and said he's for comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. And this was a mere 6 months after losing his bid for vice president of the United States. Here's the problem.
But when he and Boehner tried to do something,
they did. They did. Here's the problem. The problem is that the vast majority of people in the Republican Party are not for immigration, and not the Republican Party, I'm sorry, I don't want to misspeak. In the Republican caucus of the House of Representatives, right? It's very conservative, and they're not for, and so there's only a certain amount of political capital that Paul Ryan is going to expend. And he expended some on it, and he's not ready to do any more. I mean, he still wants to be chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. I mean, you have to understand that there's always this tension and this conflict when it comes to issues of civil and human rights and a politician. And the politician believing in those human and civil rights, right, and wanting to engage America, right, in changing, and also wanting their own career, right, to grow and to be enhanced. I mean, one of the great things about like the civil rights movement, right? As I grew up in the city of Chicago, Martin Luther King didn't have to worry about those things, right? The people that were involved in the civil rights movement didn't worry, well, is this a good time for us to march on Selma for the Democratic Party? Or might this be bad for the midterm elections? But they still look at immigration reform in terms of, maybe I'm wrong, maybe did they? I'm just kidding, all right? But my point is, had the Democratic Party and political party structures had as much influence on the civil rights movement as it has on the immigration movement in general, there wouldn't have been a march on what? I mean, Kennedy, they would have said, okay, let's not, we would never heard
they
Martin
tried
Luther
to
King.
discourage them.
They tried to, but they didn't have power over it. My point is, there's a lot still, the immigration movement has to stand alone and separate from the Democratic and the Republican Party. It's beginning to do that, and to the extent it does that, it wins, right? And it thrives. And I use the civil rights movement as an example of how the movement was separate. And so, look, it's going to happen regardless. They're going to have to do it. Now, I don't believe they can win if they do not change in November of 2016. I don't believe. I mean, you know, we could have a terrible candidate that can make terrible mistakes, and then, you know, you can erase the electoral advantage. You can't erase the electoral advantage. But it's going to be really difficult for them, very, very difficult for them, because it isn't as though, so look at the last election. The last election, Romney got almost 60% of the white vote. I think it was 59% of the white vote, right? That's huge. That's a higher percentage of the white vote than Ronald Reagan got. He still lost by 5 million votes, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, it's tough. And New Mexico, right? And you look at Colorado, and I will tell you one thing, Latinos do vote in presidential elections, and we will come out to vote, and these last thing I'm gonna say, these executive orders of the president are going to be key in the debate for presidency of the United States. Do you support it? Will you expand it? Will you protect it? And how you speak to those executive orders, whether they're in court or not, is going to be fundamental. And immigration reform is complex. If you're in the United States 5 years and you're ready to go through a background check and have American citizen children, you get a work permit. That's simple. And a lot of people are going to understand it that way.
One more question. Yes, right there.
Hi. I actually have a question about Puerto Rico. Okay. With the status of Commonwealth and the current economic and social climate on the island right now, what role do you think, whether it's political or economic, what role do you think Puerto Rico plays for the United States today and might continue to play in the near future?
And add to that just where you think the debate on you've got a statehood amendment, statehood provision that's been locked up in Congress for a couple of years.
First, Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. I say that because it is ruled by the territorial clause of the Constitution of the United States. we belong to but are not a part of the United States of America. So let's not have any confusion about that. We produce what we do not consume, and we consume what we do not produce, and simply go, yes, Chiquita bananas are brought into Puerto Rico. I mean, it's a tropical island, and we do not produce what we consume. And that dependency is a direct result of the policies of the United States and colonialism in Puerto Rico. So, having set that aside, where are we moving forward? I think there needs to be an honest debate. Puerto Rico continues to lose population, losing population. Young people are leaving at record numbers. And those that come to the United States used to be a Puerto Rican doctor, lawyer, teacher, somebody would send their kids to the University of Chicago. That young Puerto Rican would come here, graduate, and return. And they'd say bye to all of you and say, I'm going back to my tropical island of Puerto Rico. Kids do not. They do not graduate from universities here the way they used to and return to the island. My mom and dad came here because they had a 9th and a 6th grade education, and it was 1952, and there was nowhere for them to go in Puerto Rico. That is not the Puerto Rico of today. The Puerto Rico of today, it isn't people that are in 6th and 9th grade leaving. The people leaving Puerto Rico are accountants, lawyers, doctors, educated. And if you continue to have that mass migration of smart, intelligent people who have many more years of contributing to society in terms of economic, what you're getting is people like me. Who wants to move with me? I'm going to move when I'm 60. I'm not going to create any jobs when I go there. You don't need people like me. You need young people that are moving to Puerto Rico. You're not getting that. There are now 1 million Puerto Ricans in the state of Florida. 1 million. That should tell you there are more people that identify themselves as Puerto Rican in the United States than on the island of Puerto Rico. Very different than when my mom and dad came here and my experience growing up. Where do I think Puerto Rico is going? I think the Puerto Ricans have to have a debate about their future independent of the status, at least for a few moments. And to think about what makes sense economically. The problem is the stateholders will trade an economic advantage that Puerto Rico might have to lure businesses there for more food stamps. Now you're going to say, Luis, you're just against the stateholders. No, that actually happened. We eliminated, 1993, Bill Clinton eliminated Section 936 of the Internal Revenue Code. Why did he eliminate it? Because it saved billions of dollars, right? I told Bill Clinton, I will not vote for it if you do not restore that money to Puerto Rico. Why did Bill Clinton restore it to Puerto Rico? Because if you remember, it was 218 to 217. And I counted in Chicago very well. And so my one vote would make a difference. And Bill Clinton, to his credit, called me, Nidia, and Jose to his office, and he didn't give us the whole money back. He gave us 65% of the money back. But it allowed to Puerto Rico to continue to bring businesses and incentivize them. 4 years later, the stateholders went with the new Republican majority and exchanged them. You cannot have that. What is the second largest public housing authority in the United States of America? Puerto Rico. 50% of the population receives food stamps. 50%. You have a permanent 20% unemployment. Permanent. That's what you have there. It is so difficult to collect taxes on the island of Puerto Rico. And that is all created because colonialism says, don't worry, we're going to take care of you. You do not have any responsibility in this process. Really, I believe that. My mom, I told her the other day, I said, Mom, you know, how much do you pay in property taxes? She goes, I don't pay property taxes. I'm old. I bet you in Chicago. I said, no, old people pay property taxes in Chicago. We might give them a little discount, but they pay property taxes. People have a sense of, you know, the government should do this, this, and the other thing. The bonds that are coming due in Puerto Rico, I mean, look, I think we need to figure out how we create jobs that are sustainable in Puerto Rico and a future in Puerto Rico in which people have future. I won't say much more than that. I do want to end with this, David, because you said something about my dad and Spanish. And I want to end with this. When I was writing a book, I wrote a book. And when I was writing it, I went back to interview my dad because I thought that was very important. And at the end, he said to me, he said, you know, Luis, I just want to say something to you now that we've gone down memory lane together. I said, yeah, what is that, Dad? He said, remember when you were 15 and 16? I said, yeah. Do you remember how much you complained about being on this island of Puerto Rico? I said, yeah. Do you remember how you used to make me feel so guilty and terrible that I had brought you to this island where you couldn't find a girlfriend and everybody mocked you and made fun of you? Yeah. Remember how terrible it is? I'm just gonna tell you something. You write that book. Best thing that ever happened to you when we bringing you to this island. You owe a lot of your success to the fact that you came back to your roots and you understand them. And let me just tell you something, my dad couldn't have been more truthful. A lot of who I am was going back for those 4 years to Puerto Rico and learning. And it has helped me invaluably to know who I am. Because you know one of the things I gained, different than my fellow Puerto Ricans here in the United States, I learned to be proud to be Puerto Rican. I learned that Puerto Ricans could be doctors and lawyers and run things. And I mean, before that, I didn't even know a Puerto Rican cop in the city of Chicago. I mean, here it was all down, down, down. Here I wanted to straighten my hair, right? And I mean, just look at who I was. I mean, there was a lot of self-hatred, right? And once I went to Puerto Rico, I blossomed and I bloomed. And yes, I learned to speak Spanish. And by learning to speak Spanish, it's not only understanding the language, but understanding the mores and the culture, right? And just the sensibilities of people that only come with learning a language and living among them. And so I've always been thankful to my dad, as terrible as those 4 years were, being adolescents. I always thought that adolescence meant el dolor de adolescencia, right? The science of pain. It isn't. But in Spanish,
And your dad's still around?
No, he passed away. As I was writing the book, he passed away. And, but he was right. I learned how to speak Spanish. I lived in a little town. I paid sugarcane cutters. I picked coffee. I learned el jíbaro. You know what el jíbaro is? El jíbaro is it's like it's a bad way of, it's like the man who works the land, right? The man of, I learned who that was. And it was a 4-year period, and I didn't make my dad very happy yelling "Free Puerto Rico" all over the island. But you know what? It made me who I am today. I love this country, the United States of America, and I love it more because I spent time on that wonderful island of Puerto Rico. I know it sounds like a little bit of a contradiction, but by being able to love yourself and have peace with who you are, and be at peace and settled with who you are, and have that confidence, I love this country even more because I can do it freely. Thank you so much for having me here this morning.